Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with my co host Thomas D. House for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. Today, we have a special guest to talk about what has been a very big topic over the last few months: tariffs. He is an economic historian and author whose work has appeared in multiple scholarly venues and major newspapers. I'm talking about Phil Magness. Phil, thanks for joining the two of us today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
Happy to be here.
Well, it's great having you on. Before we get started, can you talk a bit about your background for those who may not be familiar with you and your work?
Yeah, so I'm an economic historian by background. Came out of George Mason University's School of Public Policy, and originally studied and did my dissertation on tariffs in the 19th century and how that converted to the modern income tax system in the early 20th century, and never thought that this would be the dominant policy issue, certainly economic policy issue of our day, because really since the end of World War II to very recently, the trend worldwide has been toward trade liberalization. And yet that's come roaring back, including invoking arguments from the 19th century to justify tariffs today. So weirdly, I ended up just situated in the middle of it all.
Yeah, I never thought the free market system would become like the outlier here in the United States, but it seems to be. Well, I know that you and Thomas know each other. Thomas got you on our show. We're very thankful for that. So I want to throw the first question or two over to him. Take it away, Thomas.
Sure. So I wanted to ask you quite a few questions about tariffs. Now, the goal here is mostly educational, right? So you're a economist with a specialization in economic history. So first, I'm going to start with the authority argument. Uh, you know, uh, D- Donald Trump, he supports protectionist tariffs. He's always supported protectionist tariffs. It's like one of the few policy things he actually seems to care about.
Right.
Other than that, he's very pragmatic about what affects his ratings, right? His approval ratings, which is actually problematic because the one thing he cares about is actually never mind. But the authority argument, I would say, would be something along the lines of uh, protectionist tariffs are very unpopular among professional economists. Is that correct?
That's absolutely the case. I mean, there are probably maybe three economists in the entire world that are in favor of protectionist tariffs. They all work in the White House, and one of those is a pseudonym of Peter Navarro. So it's really just a very small number of people in the profession that adhere to this belief. And this has been the case for the better part of a century. I mean, arguments that emerged out of the late 18th and early 19th century in favor of free trade from Adam Smith and David Ricardo really did win the day. And then there are hundreds of years of work in economics ever since then that have demonstrated the principle that tariffs are a net harm in almost every case that they're tried, all the way up until the present day. Some of the best economics on trade and tariffs have demonstrated this principle, and they say that basically any of the exceptions that are considered, they're either so rare and so narrow, or they're so politically implausible, it's not even worth pursuing. And yet, Donald Trump weirdly has aggregated all of the protectionists in the econ profession together in the White House. We have done, I mean, I've been involved in several efforts to bring to light the consensus of the discipline, including I co-authored a petition that's at antitariff.org that I think we have in excess of 600 PhD economists and over 1,800 public signers so far that are representations of Nobel Prize winners, former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors, really top figures across the discipline, and including the ideological ranges. It runs from center-left Keynesians to complete free market Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek type scholars. So it's a widespread consensus among economists of all stripe, and yet Trump has just completely ignored them and focused on these weird little fringe outliers that he's happened to bring into his administration.
Now, it's my understanding that when we're talking about tariffs used as a sort of economic policy, that I guess more of the exceptions that are allowed by economists deal with foreign policy issues or national security issues, but they're normally only a few exceptions. It would be
Right,
something
right. I
Like,
mean, you wouldn't want to outsource like nuclear weapon material to a
mhm,
hostile power.
okay.
I mean, I think there are some areas that are just pretty obvious, and no economist would sit there and say, "Wait, maybe it's a good idea to give to source our missile warheads from another country that's
Mhm.
hostile to us." Uh, but those exceptions are so narrow and so uncommon that to cite them as like the argument against the rule for free trade, it just doesn't really hold up.
Mhm. Yeah, that's more or less what I was thinking. Now one of the, theoretical ideas is that, for the sake of free trade, you can use a tariff. I mean, you can use tariffs to sort of leverage in a negotiation to get freer trade.
Right,
That
right.
one's a little bit more controversial, but where you studied, they did a lot of work on public choice theory. I think is
Right.
you say there's a public choice argument against that.
Yeah, yeah. So if you contrast what we imagine that we can do in an ideal political situation versus the political situation that we have, where there are special interests, there are corrupt powers that are trying to get a piece of whatever policy that emerges, it basically falls apart. So this idea that in a completely abstract, non-realistic world, we could use tariffs as this leverage mechanism. You throw interest groups, you throw rent seekers, you throw other parties that are seeking a specific outcome from the policy, not for the foreign policy objective, but because it benefits their own pockets, into the equation. And suddenly, that's the realistic politics of getting a tariff through, and those factors are going to play in and intrude upon the negotiation.
So would you say that the longer we wait to reverse these tariffs, the more entrenched they're going to be?
That's one of the major risks here. Although Trump has he's imposed the tariffs that we have on a really unusual route. He's done it by executive decree under emergency powers,
Mhm.
which means that they're actually kind of on a flimsier footing than even the normal processes that previous presidents have used to put tariffs into place. So up until the current Trump administration, and this includes even like Joe Biden before him and the first Trump administration, tariffs were generally put in place on narrow single product or single sector portions of the economy, and maybe targeting one or two countries. The classic example is putting tariffs on steel
Mhm.
from China.
Mhm.
And the purpose there, you can debate whether this is a real national security issue or not, but that was the route that they took, and they invoked some strategic powers under national security restrictions that exist in trade law. But that requires a regulatory review process where they interview economists, they take comments from the public. There's at least a modicum of expertise that goes into that. Trump
Mhm.
bypassed that this time and used IEPA. It's the Emergency Powers Act, which doesn't even permit tariffs. It doesn't say the word tariff anywhere in the act, but he's interpreted it in such a way that he has this blanket power to decree any and every tariff he wants for whatever reason he decrees as an emergency.
Mhm.
So that's how he's imposed the current round of tariffs, and I think he's vulnerable to a court challenge. There are several that are ongoing right now. And on top of that, just because it's like the stroke of a pen emergency decree, it could be reversed at any time. Whether that's Trump changing his mind, whether that's 4 years from now when we have another president who just wipes it off the table. So it's a very different kind of landscape than a typical negotiated tariff through the regulatory process.
So okay, so in some sense, even though it's more legally flimsy and probably illegal, the the fact that it is by executive decree might give it make it easier to reverse then as well.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And
So
I'm cautiously optimistic that's the case.
yeah, because what worries me is, you know, decades after paying higher prices on sugar, which affects everybody, we still have those terrible cane sugar tariffs. Um,
Absolutely,
yeah, we
absolutely.
still have the subsidies for the corn that we put in our gasoline and all these other things that we do with it, and which leads to
Yeah.
connected with the sugar thing, we have the corn syrup.
Yeah.
Things that you'd think would have been reversed, but they become
Right, right. Well, and you see some of this coming through, I guess, in some of Trump's own actions. He's way overreached in the initial tariffs, the Liberation Day ones that put like these ridiculous rates of upward of 60, 70% on some countries. In China, I think they jacked it up to 145%. He has backed down on them, but every time he backs down, it's like a ratchet going in one direction.
Mhm.
So we started the Trump administration with basically very, very minimal tariffs worldwide. I mean, the United States charged on average, I guess, somewhere in the range of 2 to 3% was the average tariff rate,
Mhm.
and he ratcheted that up to like 30 or 40%, and then he retracts all the way down to 10%. Now we have a 10% baseline tariff that's higher than what he started with back in January. So there is some effect like that, but again, it's all dependent on these executive orders that he's enacted.
Mm. So that's what do you call that in behavioral economics? They call that anchoring, right? Where
Yeah, absolutely,
you,
absolutely.
you start with
So he,
something ridiculous and then you bring it back to something less ridiculous, and then people
exactly.
leave it alone.
It's normalizing the less ridiculous but still dramatic tariff increase that he's put into place.
So what are the tariffs at now? It's kind of hard to keep up with. Some people act like
Yeah.
they've been removed, but they're not. They haven't been.
They have not been removed at all. So he paused for 90 days the crazy Liberation Day rates that were just basically made up out of a nonsensical formula that came out of some corner of the White House. Greek letters that, when you actually plugged in the terms to the Greek letters, they canceled each other out. And it ended up just being the rate that he wanted to assign based on the trade deficit. But he did back away from that. The current tariff level, he has maintained a 10% worldwide baseline against almost every other country. So that's new. Again, we went from 2 to 3% was the norm before him, up to 10%, and then certain countries he's targeted, like China, he pushed the rates up to 145%, and then just brought them back down to only 30%, is what he's saying. And then you also have a couple specific categories that remain in effect. So this crazy trade war he picked with Canada at the outset of his administration over alleged fentanyl smuggling, that remains in effect on specific products that are coming from Canada, Mexico, and other trading partners.
Now, is Canada, does Canada, are they before this all started, were they very protectionist in relation to us?
Not at all. Not at all. They, in fact, had both lower average tariff rates and lower non-tariff barriers. These are the regulatory means that effectively bring about protectionism through non-tax means. So it could be anything from subsidizing the home industry to restrictions on like product quality, all these tricks that countries do. But Canada was lower on both of those categories than the United States on average for many, many years prior to Trump's trade war. And this is validated by all of the major indices of free trade, the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World, the Heritage Foundation's Free Trade Index, WTO numbers, World Bank numbers. I mean, no matter where you look, Canada was a freer trader than the United States before Trump put these tariffs in place. But he's built up this fake narrative just out of nowhere that says, well, they were targeting us. And he's actually really appealed to some strange characteristics of a previous agreement that he negotiated in his first term with Canada. It was like this quota agreement that pertained to Canadian dairy. After the quota was hit, an extremely high rate kicks in, but this has like almost never been met or paid. So it's just a hypothetical argument he's claiming, and doing so in ways that are just very deceptive to the average listener.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm not even quite sure that Trump knows it's all deceptive. I'm not so sure that,
I don't think he
people
knows
around
what
him
a
haven't
tariff
convinced
is
him of
beyond
this.
a very, very superficial level.
Mm-hmm. So that you were talking about that formula, which everybody, if you go online and you debate with people, they're saying, well, all these other countries were screwing us over. Didn't you see the formula? Or didn't you see the thing that they put out there? And so that formula, you said it was based on some trickery. Like,
Yep.
I remember there was one thing in there where there were two Greek letters and one represented 0.25 and the other one represented 4. So that multiplying together, they equal 1. And that
Equal 1,
one
right.
is multiplied by whatever they're putting next to it, right?
That is exactly the case. It
Yeah.
was an improvised formula that they tried to dress up in mathematical sophistication, hoping no one would notice.
And it was all it was about was the trade deficit
Yeah, yeah,
was the main thing. If we had a
yeah.
trade deficit with somebody, then that means that we were getting screwed over by them.
Apparently,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that this is, this isn't even economics. It's not even fringe mercantilist economics. This is just completely made up nonsense, improvised on the fly to justify a policy outcome that they wanted.
So, can you explain to the listeners what a trade deficit is? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion. People confuse it with a budget deficit.
Right, right. So trade deficit, that they are not the same thing. We hear budget deficit, we think, okay, this is Congress is spending more money than we're taking in taxes, and that's bad. The word deficit is associated with bad.
Mhm.
In trade deficit, it's a completely different representation of what's going on. A trade deficit means that you're importing more goods and services than you are exporting to the rest of the world.
Mhm.
And you look at that alone, you say, oh, well, maybe we're losing something because more goods are coming in and more money is going out. That's not true at all. Because to get those goods to come in, you have to offer money in exchange for something else. It's a two-way street. It'd be like saying, I go to Walmart, I purchase groceries, now I have a trade deficit with Walmart.
Mhm.
And actually, if you look into the full international accounting system, it turns out that the trade deficit is offset by something we refer to as a capital account surplus.
Mhm.
So this is the other side of the financial transaction, and you can look at the data here. I mean, this stuff is meticulously tracked. If you bring all the inflows and outflows together of international exchanges, it by definition, as accounting definition, comes to zero. So when they say the trade deficit, that's just like focusing on a single segment of the international trade flows and asserting that we're therefore losing if we pretend that the inputs, that the inflows from the other side are not occurring. So it's just a complete nonsensical concept.
So this isn't whole countries trading. This is like individuals from the United States freely buying products or
Absolutely.
companies buying, parts or whatever from other countries because they think that they're the best deal, right?
Absolutely. And it's also people sending money abroad to relatives in another country. It's
Hmm.
people that travel abroad to spend money, or people from other countries that come to the United States to spend money here. It's investments from abroad and investments to other countries. A very uh, vibrant international exchange system that occurs around all economic activity. And the idea here is that this is better off for all parties that are involved in it,
Hmm.
because they are really individuals engaged in transaction, or individual countries engaged in transaction. It's not like the governments of these countries are saying, well, this is where trade is going to come from and this is where our goods are going to go to, even though Trump imagines that he has that power. But again, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how international exchange works.
Mm. So that's why it's been called. Some people have called it what's that? Uh, critical trade theory
Critical
because
trade theory, yeah, yeah,
any
exactly.
inequality necessarily means that somebody was committing
Was
an
wronged
injustice.
or harmed, yeah. And it's even worse than like the differential outcomes of the critical race theory world, because the inequalities it completely imaginary. It's illusory because it's pretending that the other half of the exchange simply didn't occur.
Hmm. Hmm. So it's like, okay, so we spend money on French wine. Americans spend more money on French stuff than French people buy of American stuff. But then the French people, we give them dollars normally, right?
Yeah,
And they'll use those dollars
in
somehow,
some other way.
some other way.
And I'm not a central planner. I can't tell them how they're going to use those dollars,
Yeah.
nor would it be desirable for me to do so. But the reality is that exchange is a two-way street,
Hmm.
and nobody's giving away something for free. They're getting something in return. And this is just completely like a foreign concept to people that dwell on the trade deficit.
Yeah, I can't think of many. I mean, they talk about buyer's remorse, but buyer's remorse seems like the exception, not the rule. Most
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
times when you buy something, you're pretty fine with it afterwards. You don't feel like you wasted your money.
Yeah. Or you sell it at a discount.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, so in general, allowing people to freely exchange things benefits both parties, and that
Yeah,
shows up as gains from trade in the macro. Okay,
absolutely.
so this is good. This is good. Now this connects with you recently wrote an article with Quillette. Is it pronounced Quillette or Quillette? Quillette, right?
Quillette, yeah, yeah.
Quillette, and that's the Australian paper. What's her name? Claire Lehman is the editor.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So you recently, so it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty good. It's a good thing you got in there. You know, that's a pretty difficult thing to get published on. You've had more difficult though. Last year you got published by University of Chicago for your Marx paper, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So, always controversial, but yes, certainly hitting good outlets and stuff like that.
That's interesting because got more sort of, what do you call it, online famous or whatever for opposing the far left. What do you say?
Exactly. I mean, I'm very much not a creature of the left, although I think I've been called a Marxist more times in the last 3 or 4 months than my entire career up before that, and all because I opposed restrictions on trade, as if that makes me a Marxist. I mean, this is the old Milton Friedman position. If by that definition, Milton Friedman was a Marxist.
Yeah,
which is just patently absurd, and yet that's the level of political discourse we're in. It's anyone that opposes something the Trump administration did is automatically assumed to be of the left. I'd respond to that. I'd point out the policies he is enacting right now, and I do this in the Quillette piece. The policies Trump is enacting right now are lifted straight out of the campaign platforms of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in 2020.
So that brings me back. So you brought up in this article, you talked about the National Conservatives, the NatCons, right? Yeah. And you say that they have a very leftist view of economics. It's very zero sum.
Yes.
Right? They like central planning in their own way, right?
Yeah.
Sort of industrial policy, central planning. They call it statecraft. Right.
Very statecraft is the fancy hand waving word when you can't explain what you're doing, but you want it to sound lofty and beyond reproach.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's kind of the norm. So the NatCons, National Conservative Movement, this is a political faction that started to emerge in the mid 2010s on the right. So it's weirdly it's traceable to a number of political theorists. So Yoram Hazony is one of the major figures that's associated with this movement. Although we got Sohrab Ahmari, the writer and columnist. You have some of the post-liberals that I know y'all have focused on are deeply involved in the NatCon world. And they've got another convert that they picked up sometime in the late 2010s, early 2020s by the name of J.D. Vance. And basically what the NatCons believe is that economic liberalism or free market economics was a mistake in the traditional conservative coalition. You go back to the Cold War era, the Goldwater through Reagan period, free market economics is one of the major pillars of conservatism. Sometimes it's referred to the fusionist movement. It's free market economics, traditional social values or moral values, and then anti-communism in the international arena. This was kind of the tripod of what conservatism was about. And that manifested in and basically the right's political platform up until the 2010s is that we embraced economic deregulation, lower taxes, at least nominally committed ourselves to lower spending, even though that wasn't always the case in practice. There are public choice reasons why we deficit spend, even though we committed ourselves into reducing spending and waste. And yet the idea here that the NatCons have come up with, they claim that the right's political affiliation and attachment to free markets resulted in the hollowing out of middle America, the loss of our industrial base, all these tropes that you hear. And they make it sound like Ohio is this vast wasteland that has unemployment north of 20% and towns that are crumbling apart. drove through Ohio last year, and I didn't see any of this. But that's the narrative that they constructed about themselves, and it doesn't appear in the data either. And the NatCon answer to this is they say, well, we need to go back to a pre-free market version of the right that's really drawn out of the 18th and 19th century. We need to rehabilitate the principles of mercantilism. And this is the idea that the government should direct certain sectors of the economy that are viewed as strategic. It's basically right-wing central planning as we adopt the tools of subsidies for industries that we like. We put protective trade barriers around companies internally in the United States that we like and penalize those that we don't. It's basically enlisting the power of the state to direct the economy. And NatCons, they burst onto the scene in the mid 2010s and have been on the ascendance on the right ever since then. One of the major points that I make out is NatCons really don't have any moorings in the field of economics. As we talked about, the consensus of the discipline rejects all of these arguments and has for the better part of 200 years. But they pretend as if they've rediscovered like this 18th or 19th century secret Gnostic wisdom about the economy that asserts that previously government injected greatness and industrial strength, and that we've lost our ways since the end of World War II because neoliberalism deluded everyone into free market dogmatic ideology, and they view themselves as recovering that old path from the 18th or 19th century. And what it entails is like rehabilitating what most economists today would refer to as the crackpot wing of the profession. It's saying Henry Clay, Henry Carey, who was this weird 19th century protectionist, Friedrich List. These are supposedly the intellectual moorings of economics instead of Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, and some of the more modern recent figures, or even Adam Smith. They'll jettison Adam Smith because he was at odds with the protectionists of that era. So it's really a strange intellectual milieu that has emerged on a segment of the right. And yet they've worked their way into the Trump administration. They've worked their way into the halls of power and created kind of this echo chamber internal to the White House as if this is the way to go, and have presented themselves as like the defenders of the working class, the true populists. And yet one of the points that I make, if you compare projecting themselves as like the vanguard of the laborer and the factory worker, and compare that to opinion polling, nobody wants these policies that they're enacting. Tariffs are in double-digit deficits themselves in public opinion polling, and yet they're pretending as if they're like this great populist movement. They're really steering the party, I think, into electoral defeat.
Can I jump in there real quick, Thomas?
Sure.
Something based on that. So I think this is right. I just want to run it by Phil. That aren't there currently 500,000 open manufacturing jobs in America?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and people aren't applying for them because
right.
There
There are more manufacturing jobs today than there were in the year 2000, which is the first year the Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking by sector. Jobs by sector. So we have more open manufacturing jobs today than we did 25 years ago. This fact is at odds with the entire narrative that the NatCons are telling, and there's also some qualitative evidence. Reporters have gone out and they've interviewed firms in the manufacturing sector, and you keep hearing the story and over. It's like, we can't fill the positions that we have. The labor just isn't there. And they're offering good wages. Like the median wage in one of these manufacturing jobs is well above the median wage in the typical entry-level service position. So the economics of it show that we actually do have a pretty robust manufacturing sector. Job and employment opportunities are out there for those who want them, and yet the NatCons are pretending as if there's this weird unemployment scenario that's emerged that no one seems to have any evidence of.
It doesn't seem like it shouldn't be that surprising that people aren't as interested in this technological world. We're getting into AI now, that people aren't as interested in these, more physical, more dangerous, manufacturing jobs. And there seems to be this sort of to the NatCons, I guess, and maybe there's some other people who are into this, but these careers seem like conceptually attractive, so conceptually attractive for whatever reason that the people who support tariffs seem to be at ease, potentially sacrificing higher paying, higher skilled jobs like tech jobs again, for these manufacturing openings that, like I said, already exist. Do you feel like so much of this, it's not based, like you said, it's not really based in economics and sound policy, but or even
Yeah.
looking at the dynamics, but do you think it's just there's like this strange, just I guess, a nostalgia for an earlier time, like a
There is,
do-it-yourself sort of thing that's driving this?
yeah. That is absolutely the case. They are cloaking their argument in economics, like this revival of protectionist ideology. But what you find really at the core of the NatCon movement is an aesthetic, personal, cultural preference for like a 1950s assembly line. They view this as the high water mark of American culture. They associate the order of the factory, the order of the assembly line, the fact that you did the same job as your father and your grandfather before you, and your entire career is spent in this one town and this one factory, and then you have a traditional nuclear family around that. Some elements of the NatCon movement, you also find that they're really not big fans of the fact that women have entered into the workforce. So they view like culturally that the factory job should be held by the husband. The wife is at home raising the children. This is their nostalgia, and they cloak this in economic arguments as if we need to revive the factory. But at the core of it, there's really just this cultural preference for this moment in history, and it's overlaid also with there's our anti-capitalist ideological strains that enter into the NatCon world. And you read this in like Sohrab Ahmari's books and some of these other writers, or Patrick Deneen, who's one of the major post-liberal figures. They view consumerism as like this corrupting force of American morals. They think consumerism is icky. It gives us too many choices, too many dolls to buy for our children as toys, and they're cheap and nasty, and they're from this foreign country that uses horrific labor conditions, and therefore that's corrupting. In fact, we need to go back to a time of greater austerity, essentially, on the consumer side of the economy, not the government spending side, but the consumer side of the economy. And they view this as more in line with the cultural vision that they almost fetishize from the mid 20th century United States. It's a really bizarre retrograde way of looking at society. In some instances, I call them right-wing degrowthers. They're like the environmental movement of the left that says we need to give up luxuries and choice in life because it will help us control global warming. Well, the NatCons are saying we need to give up choice and luxuries and consumption because this gets us back to our moorings in a traditional family structure and social structure that looks like 1955 America.
It's funny when you bring up the term consumerism. I'm reminded of years ago, I wrote this piece where there is this movement where these movie sites, I think it was very clearly sort of a left-wing movement, but to really lump in the websites that rate, to kind of let parents know, what to look for in movies, like if there's nudity, if there's,
Right.
swearing. But one of the category, I mean, which is fine. I think that's great. But what,
Yeah.
what was
Yeah.
what was getting me was they added consumerism as one of the categories. We got to warn, people that consumerism, and I felt like that was such a funny, progressive thing, and it's one of those things in recent years where we've seen like the far right sort of really take on the traits of the far left. It's that
Yeah.
the
It's the
horseshoe
horseshoe.
theory thing. Yeah.
It's the horseshoe, and it comes through an economic policy as well, because the very same people that adopted Elizabeth Warren's tariff policy on the right are also in favor of, we have this current tax debate over renewing the 2017 tax cuts, and several of the NatCon factions in the White House, they want to let a portion of those expire, and they say, well, we need a millionaire tax because some people are making too much money. So therefore, allow the rates on the rich to go back up to their Obama era levels, and do this basically to finance more government funding on social programs and spending, but with a right-wing flair to it. But I hear the terms like millionaire tax. Bernie Sanders ran for president on a millionaire tax in 2020. This is just a right-wing adoption of a very left-wing set of economic prescriptions and platforms based on a cultural anti-consumerism and I dare say anti-capitalism that has taken roots on parts of the right.
I'll just squeeze in one more question for you, Phil, and then I'll throw it back to Thomas. I kind of interrupted his line of questioning there, but we started to see some retail companies include, and it's been termed a few different ways, an import tax or a tariff fee line
Yeah,
item on customer receipts. This has upset the pro-tariff crowd. Of course, they're claiming it's politically motivated, but to me, whether or not it has a political effect, it feels like transparency if people are honest about it. I know there's been some issues where people aren't honest about it, but it's to me it feels like an explanation of why prices are artificially higher than they should be,
absolutely.
regardless of its intent. Do you think it will put that sort of thing, because that really affects a lot of I don't know how many customers see that on their receipts at this point, but do you think it'll put more pressure on members of Congress from their constituents to take back their rightful tariff power from the executive branch? Because so far, there clearly hasn't been enough pressure to get Congress to step up and take back its what it was given under the Constitution, the power of
Yeah,
tariffs.
yeah.
You think that may get us closer to that point, or no?
I hope so. It's certainly not going to be popular. Remember the exit polls from the 2024 election. Trump was elected as basically a voter backlash against the Biden Harris economy, and in particular, the inflation problem that just erupted in 2022. So people were not voting for tariffs, they were voting for price stability. They were voting for kind of a return to some economic normalcy. And yet here Trump has rolled out his presidency with a massive tariff agenda. I'll go back to kind of these NatCon crackpot economist types. They have this weird theory that tariffs are actually a tax on the foreign nation, that they're paid by the foreign government, which is just completely at odds with 200 plus years of empirical evidence in economics. The incidence of the tariff is transferred to the country that levels the tariff on a foreign power. So it basically means higher prices that we pay at the store because we put a tax on imports from abroad. Now, the fact that some companies would reveal that information infuriates the NatCons because that's kind of like the gig is up. That gives away the secret. That says that basically all the promises that they made about tariffs are not in fact working. And we're starting to see evidence of that. There's a lag in supply chains globally because you put goods on a ship in Asia or in Europe or wherever in the world it's coming from, you're talking about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, some cases even several months to transit the oceans, to cross the Panama Canal, to get to a port in the United States. So it means that we're just now seeing inventory effects of orders that were placed a month ago, right before Trump enacted the Liberation Day tariffs. And as we get further and further away from some of these impositions, even the baseline 10% imposition, those effects are going to play out in the global supply chain. It means that goods from abroad are going to be more expensive. It also means that companies are going to change their ordering patterns to fill the shelves at Walmart, for example. Walmart just announced the other day that they are going to start passing on some of the costs of these tariffs to consumers. And this is a completely predictable reality that several of us warned against when Trump started going down this route. So it's coming to fruition. It's kind of like you're looking at the White House and go, what's going on here, guys? You can't just pretend that this economic reality doesn't exist. And I think as soon as people start to face that at the grocery store line, or when they're walking down the aisles of the store and they start seeing higher prices on goods that they could have gotten just a few days ago or a few weeks ago for significantly less, that starts to manifest into even greater political unpopularity for these tariffs that are already in the polls that we have right now. Tariffs lag by double digits. 50 to 60% of Americans oppose tariffs. and the pro-tariff faction seems to be about 25 to 30%. That's going to continue to drop even further as the price increases are realized at the stores.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely an expiration date on the idea that this is still the Biden economy somehow.
Yes,
You see the administration
you
go
can only
back and
blame them
forth.
for so long.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to Thomas. Go ahead. Sorry about this. Sorry to intercept at
Oh
that
no,
point.
it's good. Thanks for bringing up that point, because I've heard that for about 6 years from the NatCons. Is they downplay, oh, all you guys care about is cheaper consumer goods. It's like, well, you guys wouldn't, I mean, if things are cheaper, that means the rest of us our real income goes up,
Right,
right? So we can get more for what we earn, right? So we
yeah.
can get more goods for what we earn. They don't seem to realize that connection, because I don't think that they would want to push their agenda as making us all poorer, which it will.
Yeah, yeah.
They
Well,
don't think that.
right. Well, remember the NatCons, they purport to be populists. They purport to be speaking on behalf of the working class. They're kind of like Marxists in this regard, although they all happen to be like these weird Ivy League educated lawyers and political theorists.
Mhm.
But they purport to be speaking on behalf of the working class. And something I've been pointing out since the beginning of their movement, higher prices affect the working class as well. And in many cases, it's a bigger chunk of the working class budget, the household budget, than it is on a wealthy person who can absorb those effects, the incidence of the tariff. If I'm a single parent making less than $50,000 a year, the price on the shelf at Walmart really matters to me for my weekly budget when I go to buy groceries. Less so for a rich person. So in a way, they've put in a tax system that can have some very, very regressive effects, and in fact harm the supposed working classes that they purport to be advocating on behalf of.
And then one thing I just wanted to talk about quickly is in relation to these NatCons.
Yeah.
One of the more famous ones is Orrin Cass, right?
Yes.
So Orrin Cass I think he worked for Mitt Romney years
Yep.
ago,
Yep.
and he was considered kind of a conservative. And for some reason, after that, he got all into protectionism. He's
Yes.
not really an economist. I don't know why he got into protectionism, but do you know anything about why he got into protectionism?
It's a strange intellectual journey. I debated Orrin Cass and Law and Liberty. It was a very heated back and forth. There was a debate of essays that we had, and I think at the end of the day, we'll say this outright, I think he's a fundamentally dishonest person. I think he's running a political scam. I think he's found funders, including from the political left, that are willing to throw money at him to advocate for tariffs, advocate for more spending, advocate against this supposed boogeyman of neoliberalism. And you look at the rhetoric on his website, American Compass, and it resembles something that you would have read 4 or 5 years ago on the Bernie Sanders campaign website. And the thing with Cass is he plays fast and loose with evidence and facts. There are multiple recorded instances of him misquoting Adam Smith and David Ricardo and Alfred Marshall, these economists that worked on trade theory, and he'll take them out of context, or he'll drop off entire segments of the sentence or the paragraph to make it look like they're advocating for tariffs. Or make it look like that they're rejecting free trade theory. So it's a really strange epistemic approach he takes of bending and manipulating evidence as if there's again, a secret Gnostic economic knowledge from the 18th or 19th century that we've supposedly lost because of the free traders and the free market economists, and he thinks of himself as recovering it, but because he doesn't really have evidence for his position, he feels free to manipulate, bend, and fabricate the evidence behind it. And that really comes to bear anytime you see him in these debates. And that's what came out in the Law and Liberty debate that I had with him. He writes his essay, and I immediately check the quotations and find out he's playing fast and loose with the facts on it. So it's just a very strange emergence there. And yet, because he's singing a song that the NatCons want to hear, he's telling them the answers that they want on tariffs. So tariffs are wonderful and great and will accomplish all of these things. He's promoted and elevated more so than the merits of his ideas would warrant.
Now he had kind of an embarrassing moment on Twitter a couple weeks ago.
Yes, yeah.
Where he said something along the lines of, "What does comparative advantage have to do with this?"
Right.
Do you want to explain that to the audience, why that was significant to all the economists paying attention?
Yeah, so comparative advantage is one of the foundational theories of international trade, and there are many developments that have been made upon it, but it was first put forth by David Ricardo in the 19th century as a way to explain why nations specialize in the production of certain goods. Even if they are not the best in the world at producing something, they can still produce something that is meaningful in their trade. There are several derivative theorems that come out of this, very complex theories in international trade we don't need to get into. But the notion here is that Orrin Cass displayed almost a complete unfamiliarity even with the original early 19th century Ricardian version of comparative advantage. I joked the other day that Orrin Cass's familiarity with economics seems to stop about 1890 or so, and he doesn't seem to recognize all of the developments in economic theory and quantitative testing that have happened in the century and a half since then. But every now and then he really embarrasses himself on this point. He starts to try to explain comparative advantage and just stumbles his way through like word salads of jargon about bilateral trade that he somewhere picked up along the way without even revealing a fundamental grasp of the concept.
So, just for the audience education, there's this thing called it's absolute advantage. There's absolute advantage, and there's comparative advantage that, for instance, a country has in some industry, right? Is that
right?
Okay?
Right. So absolute advantage. This was the original iteration of the free trade argument that Adam Smith made in The Wealth of Nations, and the idea, Smith had discovered specialization can make you better off, essentially. You specialize in what you're good at doing. So in the Smithian worldview, the country that is the best at producing X should focus its energy at producing X. Well, that doesn't really explain situations where you have, say, a country that is not the best in the world at producing any specific goods, but they're comparatively better at one good than another good. So that's where you enter into, this is the complexity. This was kind of the paradox that Ricardo started to explain. Is like, so suppose you have the United States is the best in the world if it produced any industrial item that it wanted to. Why would the United States ever trade with a small country in Eastern Europe that also produces industrial items, but is less effective and less efficient at doing the same thing? Well, it turns out there is trade in that because some of the specialization could occur around one particular good vis-a-vis the other goods. So it's basically relational rather than absolute is the determinant of trade. And this is just a simple bilateral model that occurs between two countries. You start to expand it to the entire global trading system, and you get all sorts of very interesting effects. In other words, it's a better way of explaining why countries trade, even when one country may be the dominant economic power in the world.
So I remember Scott Lincecum explained it in terms of this was a good one. He hires a kid to mow his lawn, or he used to. Now he has like one of those automatic mowers. But
right.
He hired a kid to mow his lawn. He's like, this kid can't do as good a job as me, but for me, it's worth the $10 an hour I give him. More, that's worth it more to me for him to do a worse job than I would do, because then I could spend my time doing lawyering or something or teaching where I get paid more and I have a comparative advantage.
Yeah, right? That's exactly. We think of this all the time, and we all have comparative advantages in our day-to-day life. But there's a trade-off at play. Our time is worth something, or the fact that I am spending my time mowing my lawn or doing repairs on my house. I could do a really good job of doing repairs on my house, but sometimes I'll hire a handyman for different reasons because that frees up my time to do something else that's even more productive for me. Or maybe I just enjoy the leisure that's associated with it. These are all expressions of choice. They're also expressions of various talents that come to bear only when marketplace interactions are occurring in such a way that the individual person or the individual company is able to make that decision. And that decision is taken out of their hands when you have a protectionist international trade policy imposed from the top down by a government. It's saying that, well, no, we know the way to order the U.S. economy, or we know the way to structure which companies should be our dominant industrial sector and which companies should be allowed to wither on the vine because their import goods from Mexico are now taxed at 40%. So that's really the crux of it all. Is you have central planners at play in the protectionist world, and they have a specific vision. They think America needs to be strong because we need a steel industry and an aluminum industry and certain types of factories, but that also means we don't need other types of factories that, for various market reasons, we've settled on to focus our energies and economic outputs in, not through any central plan, but because these are the decisions of the firms responding to market signals in the international arena.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like with if Trump doesn't pivot away from this, and there's always a chance he will, because that's right. I would say that's the strongest thing for Trump, is that he is somewhat pragmatic, more pragmatic than the ideologues in his administration.
Right. Oh, very much so. Trump has a history of, put it bluntly, he throws people under the bus. Even when he makes the error, he enables that person to make the error. Yeah. This is the guy that put Fauci in charge of the COVID response, and then as soon as that went south, he correctly did pivot away from Fauci, but never forget that he put Fauci in charge in the first place.
But everybody forgets that. They blame it on now. And the thing is it seems like he's doing that with JD Vance. He's made him the tariff czar,
the trade czar. It's I think one of the jokes that I saw about that, Vance is named the trade czar. It moves from hillbilly elegy to hillbilly eulogy as kind of his political career, which I'd actually welcome, because Vance does seem to be ideologically wedded to this post-liberal protectionist NatCon worldview in a more sophisticated level than Donald Trump. As you mentioned, Trump, his one constant is he's liked tariffs since the 1980s, although he doesn't really have it's a very fixed ideological attachment, but it's a thin ideological attachment in the sense that he doesn't seem to really know what tariffs do, other than they vaguely kind of tax other goods from other countries. That's kind of Trump's conception of tariffs. J.D. Vance has this alternative economic epistemology that he's adopted from the post-liberal NatCons, which is this Gnostic wisdom from the 18th and 19th century mercantilist schools that's supposedly been lost, and that we need to rehabilitate because that's the true path to not even prosperity, but to a more robust and culturally homogenous nation. So he is pursuing it for other ideological reasons. And I think, eventually what happens if Trump sees his popularity is tanking and his political future is tanking, if, Republicans are about to lose the 2026 midterms, or his polls are down in the 20 and 30% territory, which they very easily could be after being hit by price increases in the wake of a tariff regime in a couple months. Trump, I think, absolutely starts to pivot. And what he would do is declare victory, even though the policy caused that problem. This is what Trump does. He would declare victory, pivot to a new position, and then throw somebody under the bus for all the blame of the problems that were incurred in the wake.
I did see yesterday he was already commenting on how Besant, who's like, compared to the other people in administration, is like the good one.
Yes.
How every time he talks on TV, the stock market goes up.
Right.
So it's like, well, the reason it goes up is because he's given hints that the tariffs might be coming down.
Right. It's like when Scott Bessent goes on TV, it's, the adults are back in the room. It's not Peter Navarro or Howard Lutnick making these crazy rants on TV about how tariffs are going to be the solution to the world's problems. It's actually a guy that is at least somewhat economically grounded. I think Besant is more protectionist than I am
Hmm.
philosophically, but he is much more moderate and level-headed about the way that he's approaching it
Hmm.
than someone like Peter Navarro, who was behind this Liberation Day slap a tariff on everything just
Hmm.
because we have trade deficits. So yes, I can see that as absolutely the pivot that Trump makes if he's politically wise. And he'd be able to credibly say, he says, well, I had this guy in the Treasury Department all along, and he's been the level head to guide us through this turmoil, even though they self-imposed and self-created the turmoil.
Hmm.
But meanwhile, these other characters on the really protectionist NatCon wing get thrown under the bus as a way to kind of save his own political legacy. At least that's my optimistic view of what could happen. Is
Yeah, that's my optimistic view too. And actually, hoping maybe the Supreme Court can stop some of it too, and maybe Congress if they wake up.
absolutely, absolutely.
But there was a guy. So you're at the Independent. Last thing, because we're running out of
Yep.
time. But you're at the Independent Institute, and there was a guy who wrote a famous article for you guys about 25 years ago, Robert Higgs,
Oh yeah.
and he wrote it was a regime uncertainty, why the Great Depression lasted so long, and why prosperity resumed after the war. Do you want to say something quickly about how regime uncertainty also plays into this?
Absolutely. So, and this has been the case since about 2 weeks into the Trump presidency. Trump has not only imposed massive tariffs on the world economy, he's done so in an extremely erratic way.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to fluctuate between these on again, off again tariff orders. They are all ratcheting upward in one direction, but when he'll announce and roll out like a 60% tariff and then scale it back to 10% a couple days later in response to the stock market collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and this
There was a guy on
seesaw
Twitter
effect.
who said, "Oh man, I just started a factory."
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The seesaw effect. The stock market as well as producers, they abhor the uncertainty of it because you think about this: you own a company and you need to source your parts from Mexico, and you don't know if it's going to be a 0% tariff, a 10% tariff, or a 90% tariff
Mm-hmm.
6 months from now. What do you do? Well, one thing they tried to do, and this only works for the short term, is you rush to try to build up your inventory before the tariff takes effect.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a huge influx of goods from abroad from orders that were trying to preempt the tariff. Although that itself creates another distortion because it alters the rest of your year's production schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you can wait it out and think, well, maybe this is going to get struck down on the courts, or maybe Trump's only bluffing, and 3 months from now he's going to scale back down to earth on these crazy Liberation Day tariffs that he threatened. Maybe I can wait that out and I'll delay my orders till June. So that could be option number two. Option number three is he stays the course, and that means June comes along, and I'm stuck now, hit by this higher price, this ridiculous tariff that's in place from goods that I previously could have gotten at basically a 1 or 2% tariff rate prior to the Trump administration are now being taxed at 60 or 70%. That's going to completely alter my production decisions for the rest of the year, or basically really the duration of this entire tariff war. And then overlay that with the fact that he seems to be changing day to day or week to week on what his new position is. And really, the uncertainty is a representation of, I think, an internal battle that's playing out inside the administration. As you have identified roughly 5 or so different pro-tariff contingents, and then there's a sixth contingent that is, they're uneasy with tariffs and they're hoping to try to scale him back from that. And I think Besant and Kevin Hassett are some of the figures there. But the pro-tariff contingents are like Howard Lutnick, Peter Navarro, J.D. Vance, some of these hardcore protectionists that are all whispering in the president's ear, you need to raise tariffs, but for all sorts of different reasons. Some of them want it because they think they're going to replace the income tax with new revenue streams. Others want it for classical protectionist reasons. Others want it for leverage against China. These are all contradictory goals. And what we've seen really is whoever the last person that whispered into Trump's ear seemed to have determined the policy for the moment until a few days later, and somebody else convinces them to change course. We know one very real high-profile instance of this happened. The Liberation Day tariffs came from the hardcore protectionist Peter Navarro wing. the stock markets tanked over the course of the next week. And then Scott Bessent seemed to have like almost arranged a meeting at the White House where Navarro was on the other end of the building and distracted, and then swoops in and corners Trump and says, "Look, Mr. President, the markets are collapsing. We can't do this," and got Trump to pause it for 90 days. So this actually does seem to be playing out in real time. And the fact that they don't even have a coherent protectionist message internal to the White House is breeding even further uncertainty on top of the existing tariffs. And that's where you get like the Higgsian situation playing out in real time in the markets. And unfortunately, I think we're going to be stuck with that, at least for the short term, until we have some clear resolution. In other words, Trump either needs to jettison the NatCons, throw them under the bus, or we're going to be stuck in economic turmoil for basically the remainder of his term.
Yeah, sure would be nice if Congress just took away his discretion,
or the Supreme Court knocks it down because it's unconstitutional.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also on the one part illegal because there's no national emergency that would.
I mean, it's made up, improvised national emergencies.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, are you suggesting there's no emergency with foreign films coming into this country? One of the tariffs that we're talking about here, or the Penguin Army assault from wherever that. We're getting rid of the name of that island now. But
Penguin Island.
I like the meme with the penguin sitting at the White House where Zelensky was sitting and they're arguing with him. So he's wearing his tuxedo, so you know.
Yep, exactly. He wore a suit.
I'll have to link to that in the show notes for people who haven't seen that, because it's some pretty good stuff came out of that snafu there. But well, Phil, we want to thank you for coming on the Reagan podcast. You've been very generous with your time. I think listeners and viewers will find this episode very helpful, and we'd love to have you back on sometime.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Well, great. Well, okay, everyone. Well, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to make sure and mention to if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and like that video if you like what you heard. If you found this educational, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to us on whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure you subscribe to those as well. Anything else you'd like to add, Thomas, before we leave this week?
Oh no, that's it. But thanks a lot, Phil. I enjoyed this podcast a lot. I hope the listeners liked it as much as me. So.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Reagan Caucus podcast.